What would you do if your husband publicly rejected you in front of an entire kingdom? Stood up and said, "Then she belongs with me." Before we begin, tell me in the comments, have you ever seen someone take another person for granted until it was too late? And if you enjoy stories filled with betrayal, revenge, dignity, and impossible choices, subscribe now, because this story only gets more shocking from here. Now let's begin. The ballroom fell silent, not the comfortable silence of polite society, the dangerous kind. The kind that spreads through a crowd when everyone realizes they have just witnessed something they should never have seen. Hundreds of crystal candles illuminated the grand hall. Nobles stood frozen. Musicians lowered their instruments. Servants stopped moving. Every eye was fixed on one woman. Lady Eleanor Ashford, the Duchess of Blackthorn, and the expression on her face made even strangers uncomfortable. Because humiliation always looks the same. No matter the century, no matter the country, no matter how much wealth surrounds it, the feeling is universal. And tonight, Eleanor was drowning in it. Standing only a few feet away was her husband, Duke Alexander Blackthorn, one of the most powerful men in the kingdom. Tall, handsome, respected, feared, and at that exact moment, cruel. The annual Winter Sovereign Ball was the most important social event of the year. Every influential family attended. Every alliance was strengthened. Every rumor was born, and every mistake became history. Alexander knew that, which made what happened next even worse. The master of ceremonies smiled and raised his voice. "Your Grace, perhaps you would honor the Duchess with the opening dance." The crowd immediately applauded. It was tradition. The Duke and Duchess always opened the evening together. Every married noble couple knew the expectation. Alexander looked toward Eleanor. She offered a small smile. Not because she was happy, but because she had spent years learning how to hide pain. Then Alexander laughed, actually laughed. The sound echoed across the ballroom. "I think not." The applause died instantly. Confused glances spread across the room. The master of ceremonies blinked. "Your Grace?" Alexander took a sip of wine. "I prefer dancing with someone who can still inspire admiration." A few gasps escaped the crowd. Eleanor felt her stomach drop. But Alexander wasn't finished. People like him rarely stopped after the first wound. They enjoyed watching the damage spread. His eyes moved toward a beautiful young noblewoman standing nearby. Lady Vivienne Hartwell, 23, unmarried. Known across the kingdom for her beauty. The subject of endless gossip. Alexander extended his hand toward her. Perhaps Lady Vivienne would be a more suitable partner. The room exploded into whispers. Some looked shocked. Others looked entertained. A few looked away entirely. Because decent people become uncomfortable when cruelty is performed for an audience. Vivienne hesitated, only for a second. Then she accepted his hand. The musicians nervously resumed playing, and Alexander led another woman onto the dance floor, while his wife stood alone, humiliated, discarded, invisible. Modern psychologists often talk about public humiliation as one of the strongest emotional pains humans can experience. Researchers have repeatedly found that social rejection activates many of the same regions of the brain associated with physical pain. That's why betrayal hurts. Not metaphorically, literally. And Eleanor felt every second of it. Yet she didn't cry. That surprised everyone. Most expected tears. Most expected anger. Most expected a scene. Instead, she simply stood there. Still, quiet, dignified. Which somehow made the moment even harder to watch, because everyone could see she was trying to survive it. one breath at a time. Across the room, older women exchanged knowing looks. Many had lived similar stories, different details, same pain. A husband who stopped seeing them, a marriage that became a transaction, a love that slowly transformed into obligation. The setting was aristocratic. The emotions were not. They were painfully familiar. Eleanor remained motionless until she felt someone approach. It was Margaret, her longtime lady's maid and closest friend, though society would never allow her to say that publicly. "Your Grace," Margaret whispered. "We should leave." Eleanor's eyes remained fixed on the dance floor, on Alexander, laughing, smiling, looking happier than he had looked in years. "Not yet," Margaret frowned. "Why?" Eleanor swallowed hard. "Because if I leave now, everyone will remember me as the woman who ran." The answer broke Margaret's heart, because it revealed exactly how long Eleanor had been fighting this battle. Not tonight, not this month, not this year. Years, years of neglect, years of loneliness, years of pretending, and still she refused to surrender her dignity. The music continued. Alexander spun Vivienne through the center of the ballroom. Applause followed. Several nobles even cheered. That was the worst part. Not the insult. The approval. The way people reward cruelty when it's performed by someone powerful. History has always had that problem. And perhaps it always will. Then something unexpected happened. A servant entered the ballroom, quickly, urgently, his face pale. He moved directly toward the royal table, toward the king's advisors. Whispers began spreading almost immediately. Something had happened. Something important. The atmosphere shifted. Alexander noticed it too. The dance ended. Conversations resumed. But a strange tension had settled over the room. Moments later, one of the king's senior officials approached the ballroom entrance. He carried a sealed document. Heavy. Official. Bearing a crest few people recognized. The man's voice echoed through the hall. "Attention!" Everyone turned. "The crown has received confirmation regarding the Hawthorne succession." Confused murmurs spread instantly. The Hawthorne succession? That couldn't be possible. The Hawthorne estate had been locked in legal disputes for years. One of the largest fortunes in the kingdom. Land, shipping routes, mines, investments. Enough wealth to rival entire noble houses. Most believed the bloodline had ended. Apparently, they were wrong. The official broke the seal, then read aloud. "The final heir has been identified." Now even the king appeared interested. The room held its breath. Alexander barely paid attention. His focus remained on Vivienne, which would later become one of the biggest mistakes of his life. The official continued reading. "The lawful heir to the Hawthorne inheritance is..." He paused, scanning the document. Then his eyes widened. The expression on his face changed instantly. Shock, genuine shock, the kind no actor could fake. Slowly, very slowly, he lifted his gaze toward the crowd. Toward one specific person. Toward a woman standing completely alone near the edge of the ballroom. Eleanor. The official's voice trembled. Lady Eleanor Ashford Blackthorne. The ballroom exploded. Gasps, shouts, disbelief. Alexander froze. The wine glass slipped from his fingers and shattered against the floor. And before anyone could process what had just happened, a powerful male voice spoke from the entrance. Cold, confident, dangerously calm. Actually, every head turned. A stranger stood in the doorway. Tall, military posture, dark coat, silver insignia. A man nobody expected to see. His eyes locked onto Eleanor. Then he said words that would change all their lives forever. She was never meant to belong to Blackthorn. Silence. Pure silence. Then the stranger took one step forward and said, "She was promised to me." The ballroom erupted. Not with conversation, with chaos. Voices crashed into each other from every direction. What did he say? Promised to him? Who is that man? Is this some kind of joke? Even the musicians looked terrified. The king's advisors exchanged alarmed glances. Several guards instinctively moved toward the entrance. But the stranger didn't seem concerned. He stood perfectly still, as if he already knew every eye in the room would eventually belong to him. And perhaps he did. Because some people walk into a room hoping to be noticed. Others walk in knowing they cannot be ignored. The man slowly removed his gloves. His gaze never left Eleanor. Not once. And that was what unsettled her most. He wasn't looking at her like a stranger. He was looking at her like someone who had spent years searching, years remembering, years waiting. Alexander recovered first. His pride wouldn't allow anything else. "What nonsense is this?" the Duke demanded. The stranger finally looked at him. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. "No nonsense at all." His voice was calm, almost polite, which somehow felt more threatening. "And who exactly are you?" Alexander asked. The man reached into his coat. Several guards immediately stepped forward. The ballroom tensed. But instead of a weapon, he produced a folded document, a royal document, sealed, official, ancient. One of the king's advisors instantly recognized the crest. His face drained of color. "Oh no!" The whisper escaped before he could stop it. Everyone heard. The stranger handed the document to the advisor. The older man opened it. "Read. Read again." Then looked up in complete disbelief. "It's authentic." The room went silent. Alexander frowned. "What is authentic?" The advisor swallowed. "His identity." The stranger finally spoke. "My name is Nathaniel Ravenshire." The reaction was immediate. Gasps. Shock. Fear. The Ravenshire name had not been spoken publicly in years. Not because people forgot it, because people remembered it too well. House Ravenshire had once been one of the most powerful families in the kingdom. Military commanders, political strategists, royal advisors, their influence had stretched across generations. Then 20 years ago, they vanished, or at least that's what most people believed. Rumors claimed the bloodline ended. Others claimed exile. Some whispered assassination. Nobody knew the truth. Until now. Alexander crossed his arms. "And why should I care who you are?" Nathaniel's expression didn't change. "Because your wife was legally betrothed to me before either of us were old enough to remember." The silence that followed felt endless. Eleanor stared at him, completely stunned. Betrothed? That was impossible, wasn't it? Yet deep inside her memory, something stirred. A fragment. A forgotten conversation. A childhood argument between adults. A promise she was never allowed to understand. Nathaniel continued. 22 years ago, our families signed an agreement." The advisor nodded slowly. "It's true." The crowd immediately exploded into whispers. Alexander looked furious. Even if such an agreement existed, it means nothing now. Nathaniel's eyes hardened. "Ordinarily, I would agree." Then he glanced toward the inheritance document. But tonight changed everything. Now everyone was paying attention, because suddenly two impossible revelations were colliding. Eleanor wasn't merely a duchess. She was now one of the wealthiest women in the kingdom, and apparently, the center of a forgotten agreement. Nathaniel looked directly at Alexander. Your marriage was built upon information that was intentionally concealed. The Duke's confidence faltered. Only slightly. But Eleanor noticed.
And this is where everything changes. Because stories like this aren't just about revenge or power. They're about truth finally catching up. If this hit you even a little, don't just scroll past. Follow for part 2 and tell me in the comments. Would you stay and rebuild? Or walk away forever?
For the first time all evening, her husband looked nervous. Nathaniel saw it too, and smiled. A very small smile. The kind people wear when they already know the truth. Tell them, Alexander. The Duke's jaw tightened. Tell them what? Tell them why Eleanor's family disappeared from society. The room grew still. Every noble leaned forward. Every servant stopped moving. Even the king's advisors were listening now. Alexander said nothing. Nathaniel took another step. Then I'll do it. Eleanor's heartbeat accelerated. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. For years she had believed a simple story. Her father had made poor investments. The family had fallen into debt. Their social standing collapsed. Alexander had supposedly rescued her by offering marriage. That was the story. The only story she had ever known. Nathaniel's voice cut through the silence. Your father wasn't ruined. Eleanor froze. He was betrayed. The words hit like lightning. What? Her voice was barely audible. Nathaniel looked at her. Gentler now. Far gentler. Your father discovered evidence of corruption involving several noble houses. The ballroom erupted again. Corruption accusations could destroy entire families. Nathaniel continued. He planned to expose them. Alexander stepped forward. Enough. Nathaniel ignored him. Before he could present the evidence, his business partners withdrew support. Another pause. Those partners included House Blackthorne. Every eye turned toward Alexander. The Duke's face had become unreadable. Eleanor felt her stomach twisting. No, this couldn't be true, could it? Suddenly, memories returned. Small details. Strange conversations. Her father's frustration. Her mother's fear. Letters that disappeared. Visitors who stopped coming. Questions nobody answered. The things that seemed meaningless at the time. The things children notice, but don't understand. Nathaniel reached into his coat again. This time he produced a leather folder. Old. Worn, protected, carefully preserved. The evidence survived. The room practically stopped breathing. Alexander's voice turned dangerous. Where did you get that? Nathaniel smiled. There it is. The Duke's expression changed instantly, and everyone saw it. Fear. Real fear. Not embarrassment. Not irritation. Fear. The kind that appears when a secret refuses to stay buried. Nathaniel handed the folder to the royal advisor. The older man's hands trembled. He opened it. Read. Turned another page. Then another. The color drained from his face. My God. No one spoke. No one moved. The advisor slowly looked toward the king. Your Majesty, he struggled to continue. These documents require immediate investigation. That sentence changed everything. Not accusation. Not conviction. Investigation. Because history shows something interesting. Powerful people rarely fear accusations. They fear evidence. Alexander suddenly realized the room was no longer standing behind him. It was watching him, judging him, questioning him. The same nobles who had laughed earlier were now keeping their distance. Nobody wanted to be near a potential scandal, especially one this large. And then something happened that shocked Eleanor even more. Nathaniel walked toward her, slowly, carefully, as though approaching someone injured, not physically, emotionally. He stopped a respectful distance away, then spoke softly. So many years. Eleanor stared at him. Who are you? The question wasn't about his name. It was deeper than that. Nathaniel understood. I was your father's closest friend's son. A memory flashed. A summer garden, a boy, 2 wooden swords, laughter, a promise, then gone. The memory disappeared almost instantly, but it was enough. Nathaniel saw recognition flicker across her face. You remember. Barely, but yes. Somewhere inside her, she remembered. Not details, feelings, safety, trust. A childhood untouched by politics and power. The version of herself that existed before life became survival. Alexander suddenly stepped forward. That's enough! His voice echoed through the ballroom. Nathaniel turned. The 2 men faced each other. Power against power. Past against present. Truth against reputation. The tension was suffocating. Then Alexander made a mistake. The kind desperate people make. He reached for Eleanor's arm. Not violently, but possessively. As if reminding everyone she belonged to him. The moment his hand touched her sleeve, Nathaniel's expression changed, instantly. Every trace of politeness vanished. The room felt it. Even the guards felt it. A dangerous silence settled over him. Remove your hand, Alexander laughed. Or what? Nathaniel took 1 step closer. And suddenly nobody was breathing. Or I stopped being civil. The Duke of Blackthorn stepped backward. The crowd saw it. Everyone saw it. And that single step frightened them more than any threat could have. Because powerful men don't retreat. Not unless they recognize something dangerous, something capable of defeating them. Nathaniel looked toward Eleanor. His voice softened again. There are things you don't know. She swallowed. What things? Nathaniel hesitated. For the first time since entering the ballroom. Then he spoke words that shattered the last piece of the life she thought she understood. Your father didn't die from illness. The world stopped. Eleanor couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't move. Nathaniel's eyes filled with something that looked remarkably like regret. Someone had him killed. The words didn't just land. They detonated. For a moment, no one reacted. Not because they didn't hear him, but because the mind refuses certain truths the first time they arrive. Eleanor stood perfectly still. Her face had gone pale in a way that made her almost unreal under the candlelight. Someone had killed her father. Not illness. Not misfortune. Not bad luck. Murder. Across the ballroom, Alexander didn't speak. He didn't need to. His silence was louder than any denial. Nathaniel watched Eleanor carefully, as if he was prepared for her to break. But she didn't. Not yet, because shock has stages. And the first stage is disbelief. That's impossible, Eleanor whispered. Her voice was small, not weak, controlled, but fragile in a way that made the entire room uncomfortable. Nathaniel nodded slightly. I wish it were. Alexander finally laughed, a short, sharp sound. Do you hear yourself? The Duke said. You walk into my home, accuse noble families of murder, produce old documents, and expect us to believe this madness. He turned toward the crowd. This is slander. A few nobles nodded instinctively, comfort returning, because denial is easier than truth. But then Nathaniel spoke again, calm, steady, and devastating. Then explained the sealed letters. Alexander's jaw tightened. Nathaniel continued. The ones your household intercepted before they reached the crown. A murmur spread instantly. Intercepting royal correspondence was not just scandalous. It was treason. Alexander's expression flickered for the first time. Just for a fraction. But Eleanor saw it. Nathaniel saw it. And that was enough. Nathaniel turned slightly toward the royal advisor holding the folder. Open! The final page! The advisor hesitated, then obeyed. His hands trembled as he turned the document. Silence swallowed the room. Then his voice cracked. These are signed confessions. Gasps erupted. From financial agents tied to multiple noble houses. He swallowed hard, including Blackthorn. Eleanor felt her knees weaken, but she didn't fall. Not yet, because something inside her still refused to collapse without understanding everything. Alexander's face hardened. Now the mask was slipping. What exactly are you trying to do? He snapped at Nathaniel. Nathaniel didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. I'm finishing what your family tried to bury 20 years ago. He turned toward Eleanor, and for the first time his voice softened fully. You were never meant to live this life. That sentence hit harder than the accusation, because it wasn't about politics, or wealth, or power. It was about her. Eleanor's eyes trembled. Then what was I meant to be? She asked quietly. Nathaniel didn't hesitate. Free. The word echoed strangely through the ballroom, as if no one had heard it in a very long time. Alexander stepped forward again, anger replacing fear. This ends now. But something had changed. The room was no longer his. Not entirely. Because truth, once spoken loudly enough, starts to spread on its own. Nathaniel turned back to him. Then let's end it properly. He reached into his coat one final time. The room braced. But this time he didn't produce documents. He produced a small sealed pendant. Old, worn, gold, darkened by time. He held it out toward Eleanor. Her breath caught instantly. She knew that pendant. Not logically, emotionally. Her fingers moved before she even decided. When she touched it, her memory cracked open. Not fully, but enough. A child's laughter. A garden. Her father kneeling. This belongs to you, a voice had said. Her hand shook. Nathaniel watched her closely. You remember now. Eleanor's voice barely came out. That was mine, Nathaniel nodded. It was given to you the day your father discovered the truth. Alexander's patience finally broke. You are filling her head with lies. But Eleanor didn't look at him. For the first time all night, she looked away from her husband completely. And that silence hurt him more than any argument. Because being ignored by someone who once depended on you is its own kind of downfall. Nathaniel stepped closer to her. Not invading, not forcing, just close enough to be heard. The men who destroyed your family believed you would disappear quietly into marriage. He paused. They believed power would erase you. His gaze shifted toward Alexander. But they underestimated something. Eleanor's eyes lifted. What? Nathaniel's answer was simple. You survived. That moment changed something in her, not dramatically, not instantly, but deeply, like a door quietly unlocking inside a room she had forgotten existed. Alexander saw it, and for the first time, he looked uncertain. Not angry, not commanding, uncertain. Because control only works when the person you control still believes in it. And Eleanor was beginning to stop believing. Nathaniel turned to the king's advisor. This investigation must proceed publicly. The advisor nodded slowly. It will. Then guards moved forward, not toward Nathaniel, toward Alexander. The shift was subtle, but unmistakable. The Duke finally understood. This was no longer a confrontation. It was a collapse. His voice dropped. This is a political mistake. Nathaniel shook his head. No. A pause. This is accountability. The word landed like a verdict. Alexander looked around the room, searching for support, for loyalty, for anything familiar, but all he found was distance. People stepping away, eyes avoiding his, whispers forming. The way crowds abandon someone they are afraid to be associated with. And then Eleanor spoke again, softly, but clearly. "Did you do it?" Alexander turned to her sharply. For a moment, something human flickered in his expression. A plea, a warning, a last chance to remain what he pretended to be. But Eleanor didn't move, she didn't look away. Not this time. "Did you have my father killed?" The entire ballroom held its breath. Alexander opened his mouth, then stopped. And that hesitation, that silence, was enough. Eleanor nodded slowly, as if confirming something she had already felt for years but never dared to name. Nathaniel signaled the guards. Alexander stepped back. No, this is not finished. But it was, because his rarely announce themselves. They simply arrive. And everything that follows is consequence. As Alexander was escorted away, the ballroom remained frozen. No applause, no celebration. Just the heavy realization that a powerful story had just broken open in front of them and could never be closed again. Eleanor, stood alone. Again. But this time, it was different. Because solitude after truth is not the same as solitude inside a lie. Nathaniel turned toward her one last time. "You have a choice now." Eleanor looked at him. "For the first time," she said quietly, "it feels like I do." Nathaniel nodded. "I can take you somewhere they can never reach you." A pause. "Or you can stay and rebuild everything they tried to destroy." Eleanor looked at the ruined remnants of her old life. The lies, the marriage, the silence. Then she looked at the door Alexander was taken through, and finally, at herself. Not as a duchess, not as a wife, but as something she had never been allowed to fully become. A person, she exhaled slowly. "I want to stay." Nathaniel studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. As I expected, he stepped back. But before leaving, he added one final truth. "Then, justice will not be quiet." And for the first time that night, Eleanor didn't feel like a victim. She felt like the beginning of something far bigger than her pain. Months later, the kingdom would remember this night as the moment the old noble order began to fracture. Not because of a man who entered a ballroom, but because a woman they once dismissed finally stopped disappearing.
You can use this right after a big reveal or tension shift. Think about this. How many people get disrespected in silence just because the other person holds power? That's what makes this moment so intense. Because when truth finally enters a room built on lies, it doesn't whisper, it destroys everything. And what happens next is something no one in that ballroom was ready for.